For those of you who haven't met yet, my name is Chris Yip, and it's really my privilege to serve as Dean of the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering here at the University of Toronto. And while we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. So please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the land on which you are operating. Today, I'm calling in from Toronto, dialing in from Toronto. I'd like to acknowledge that this is the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to another edition of our Disruptors and Dilemmas speaker series. And for over a decade now, this powerful forum has brought thoughtful insights and analysis to our entire U of T community. It's a great way to connect with our colleagues in other disciplines and become more informed about how new technology is shaping our society. I'd like to thank our partner faculties, the Faculty of Arts and Science and the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, for their collaboration on this particular event. It is really hard to believe it's only been a little more than 3 years since generative AI has become part of daily life. At that time, we heard a lot about how the college essay was dead and maybe higher ed itself may quickly become rendered obsolete. I certainly hope not. Looking back now, that obviously hasn't happened. But it's pretty clear at the same time, generative AI has induced profound changes in how we think about both teaching and learning. Here in the Faculty of Engineering, we actually just released our most recent 5-year strategic academic plan. And indeed, the very first pillar of that plan is educating adaptive thinkers to address complex challenges. And I can tell you, we thought long and hard about the role of AI in meeting that goal. And perhaps the best way to sum it up is this: I do not believe it's productive to treat AI only as if it's a threat to the status quo. And in fact, what we need to do is adapt, learn from experts on the intersection between AI and education, and hopefully learn how to use AI as a tool to unlock even more human potential. And that really is what today is all about. It's amazing to see such a great and amazing multidisciplinary panel for today's event, and I really look forward to hearing all that they have to say. So first off, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Claire Kennedy. Claire is an alumna of U of T Engineering, former chair of U of T Governing Council, and a past president of Engineering Alumni Association. Currently, as co-chair of the Defy Gravity fundraising campaign, Claire is helping to lead a coalition of volunteers devoted to inspiring the highest level of support for advancing U of T's excellence and aspirations. You've already brought us closer to our goal of 1 million engagement with our alumni by simply being here today. So once again, thank you everyone who's logged on to be part of this amazing forum today. Many of you may also know Claire played a key role in developing this lecture series. Started as Biz School, now called Disruptors and Dilemmas. So on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to acknowledge your determination and hard work. Thank you, Claire, for the launch of Biz School and now Disruptors and Dilemmas. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, TD Insurance and Manulife, for making today's event possible. And so with that, I'll turn things over to Claire to introduce our panel. Claire.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you and welcome to our panelists. We've got a great lineup, Chris, as you have highlighted for us. Professor Susan McCann in the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering, Professor Eunice Jang from OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and Associate Professor Paolo Granata from the Faculty of Arts and Science. And welcome to you, our Disruptors and Dilemmas audience. Whether you're a veteran participant or new to this series, we're absolutely delighted to have you here. Thank you also for the questions that you have already submitted. Some, I know, written with the aid of generative AI. Some folks fessed up about that. Seems very appropriate in this context. And we've already incorporated some of the themes that you have highlighted into our discussion. And subject to time, we'll get to a few more of our audience questions. Please navigate to the Q&A area to submit your questions. Please don't put them into the chat because I won't be able to see them, unfortunately. So with that, we're going to get started. We're going to dive right in. Our theme is rethinking higher education in the era of AI. I'm going to come to each of our panelists with our opening questions, starting with you, Susan, then I'm going to go to Eunice, and then I'm going to come to Paolo. From your vantage point at the University of Toronto, how is AI reshaping the landscape of teaching, learning, and assessment? Susan.
Yeah, so I think there are certainly some aspects of teaching and learning that are remaining absolutely the same. You know, the interaction between faculty and students, the ways we bring people into a classroom to have conversations with each other. These things are core to pedagogy in many, many disciplines, and they remain, I think, a constant and a part of the educational experience. That said, I think assessments in particular, but also other forms of pedagogy, are being deeply impacted. One large area of concern is whether we can assign big take-home assignments where students have the opportunity to think really critically for an extended period of time in depth. Like, some of that is being really undermined by the availability of AI. And in some cases, students are using AI really appropriately, and we'll talk about that some more. But I'm also really excited about this technology in terms of things like enabling some very interesting simulations or other forms of pedagogy that are going to be easier to enable and adapt and make personalized through this technology.
Great. Well, thanks, Susan, for focusing on what's staying the same as well as what is changing. There's a lot to unpack there. Eunice, let me come to you with this question. Just make sure you're off mute there.
Thank you, Claire. What we are seeing isn't just technological changes. It is a conceptual shift in entire educational ecosystem. So AI is no longer a tool that supports education. It is becoming part of our infrastructure of how learning happens right now. So that shift changes everything, right? So let's think about our teaching. So teacher's role is moving from delivering content to designing learning, right? So our teachers are becoming architects of AI-mediated environment. They are the interpreters of AI output and also ethical decision makers. Think about our students. AI is clearly advancing personalization, as Susan already mentioned, and that is the most consistent finding, right? But the gains, however, the gains in higher order sort of thinking skills are far less clear with this rise of AI. Critical thinking, metacognition, creativity, those are not automatically gained, right? Over-reliance and service level engagement are challenges that we all face at the same time. As again, Susan mentions, assessment is where the disruption, the title of our panel, hits the hardest. AI enables things we couldn't do before, right? The real-time feedback, continuous assessment, automated scoring of complex work, but at the same time, it really challenges the core of what we assume assessment measures, right? Which is the authorship. Did you really complete this assessment, the assignment? Evidence of learning. What kind of evidence do we have to find? And fairness, right? So Corbin and Berman put it as a wicked problem, which means actually we're constantly trying to solve problems. We think we solve it, but then that solution creates another problem, right? So I think the benefits of AI is real. However, at the same time, we are now facing probably more issues and problems. Yeah, so just today's classroom, just look at our OEZ classrooms as well as many undergraduate classrooms. Students walk into 300 seats undergraduate lecture or graduate seminar at OEZ, and having learned, they can actually access content faster and more efficiently alone with AI. For them to be in classroom, what is the added value? And that's where we are greatly concerned about student attendance, right? And how to engage our students in better. And if we continue to focus on just knowledge dissemination, we're going to lose, right?
I want to come back to that comment about attendance a little bit later because of some recent headlines around the experience with Ontario high school students. But let me come to you, Paolo. You're an associate professor in the Faculty of Arts and Science. We're going to come to the book that you've written. But tell us from your vantage point, how is AI reshaping the landscape of teaching, learning, and assessment?
Well, after 5 centuries since Gutenberg's revolution, so the rise of the Gutenberg galaxy, we are now entering the Alan Turing galaxy. That means an entirely new mindset in our relationship with knowledge. For centuries, the book has been the main interface for knowledge. Computer culture changed this kind of setting, and now finally artificial intelligence is projecting us into a new interface for knowledge. AI is the new printing press. And that means that it's not just a tool, as Eunice said, it's not just a product and not a service. It's a cognitive environment. AI is providing us a new cognitive environment we deal with in order to explore the potential of these technologies. Again, not just as a tool, but as a cognitive environment. I'm excited because, again, the acronym AI may be understood as not just artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. This is our destiny as human beings. We have been always thinking by tools. Since language and writing and the printing press, we need tools to think better, to elevate the way we think. And AI falls into this trajectory. So thinking by the tools we have. And we know that this is an epistemic shift. We are really witnessing this disruption in terms of epistemology, which simply put, it means how do we know what we know? And the fundamental understanding is that what we know changes when the medium through which we know changes.
Interesting, very interesting. There's lots that we'll come back to in this, but it's interesting, Paolo, that you position this on a sort of a continuum of knowledge and learning, you know, all the way back to the revolution from Gutenberg's printing press. And at the same time, there's a sort of a big paradigm shift that's going on here, but there have been others in human history. So situating that way, I think, is a really interesting way to think about it. Susan, you have a unique vantage point at the University of Toronto in your role as Vice Provost of Digital Strategies and Innovations in undergraduate education. And that gives you particular insights into the way AI is being integrated across the institution. So can you give us an example of, you know, where U of T is at the forefront in this evolution, in this revolution?
Yeah, I think there's lots of examples. So yes, just prior to taking the role in digital strategies, I was leading the AI task force for the University of Toronto, and we delivered our final report last June. So we've been now operationalizing the recommendations from that report. And some of those include starting to build out an AI kitchen. We're calling it a kitchen because it will have appliances in it, you know, tools. Some of those tools, you know, coming from engineering, it's probably the better analogy is a maker space. You know, some of the tools you can just pick up and use right away. Others you need some safety training for. And then there's, you know, the laser cutters that are, you know, you can give the person your plan, but then someone else does the work. And so that idea of having tools at different levels available to different kinds of users in our environment is really, we think, critical to giving everybody the potential to work upward toward really big and substantial projects in both research and teaching. We now have protected versions of ChatGPT available. We have protected versions of Anthropic tools available for some of our community. We've been experimenting, I think, in the teaching and learning space. One of the biggest experiments is with an AI tutoring system that was implemented in about 100 courses over this past year. Really interesting learnings from that. And so I would say, while many schools are trying sort of parts of this, we are taking sort of an all-in approach, trying, because of our size, we have, you know, on any given pilot, we are able to find a really critical mass of people interested in working through that with us as a community. So our community of practice in this area has just been outstanding. And I would say both in the teaching and learning space and also in the administrative space, we're just entering into a process of redesigning our student information system, Rosie, which many alumni will be very familiar with, perhaps not very fond of. And we are using AI to help us do analysis, for example, experience analysis design, and working through the design process. And so taking engineering design plus AI and applying that to a really large legacy system at the university in this process. So I think at many levels, from students working with AI tutors all the way up through big IT projects like the Rosie modernization process, we're working at sort of all of those levels with AI.
All of these different, all of these. I like that framing of the kitchen because it does, give you kind of immediately the idea of experimentation.
Mhm.
And, like you say, there are simple recipes and there are more complex ones.
And we need some chefs, right?
Right.
Like it's a good idea to have some cooking instructors in there, and we probably want you to take a bit of a safety course before you start working with the sharp knives.
Yeah, exactly. I really like that. I really like that framing. Eunice and Paolo, you both independently commented that AI isn't a tool. Eunice, I think you talked about it as being part of the infrastructure. Paolo, in your new book, Generative Knowledge, Think, Learn, Create with AI, frames it not as a tool, but as a creative partner, AI as a creative partner. So talk to us a little bit, elaborate for us this concept of creative partner. What does it mean and how does it reshape the classroom experience?
Yeah. As a partner, artificial intelligence is actually an artifice of human intelligence. Let's not forget that we usually tend to associate the very idea of artificial to something that is distant from the humankind. But artificial means made by humans. So artificial is human. So this partner is not an alien to us. To some extent, we made it. The real intelligence of artificial intelligence is human, those who made it and those who use it. And so I call it an intelligent use of artificial intelligence. And this partnership, I call it asymmetric. It's not symmetric. It's the opposite. So it's different roles because we can delegate what AI can do better than us, and we can keep what humans can do better than AI. And so it's not a competition, it's an alliance. And I believe in this, relationship in this partnership, we really can find the different roles that together can really, enable us to augment, to amplify what we do. After all, artificial intelligence is an amplifier. It amplifies what we bring to the table, to stick with the metaphor of the kitchen, and it multiplies if we bring laziness, we will get back laziness. If we bring epistemic curiosities, intuitions, insights, and if we bring that kind of values we want to embed into education and our relationship with knowledge, we will be able to, again, in this partnership, to receive back and so to multiply what we bring to the table. And I believe that this is, again, the real value of what I call the generative approach, generative knowledge, the generative potential of artificial intelligence. I really believe that in an age of AI, the real edge goes to those who can generate new knowledge. And AI can be a partner to do this.
Well, that's great. It's actually a very sort of hopeful and optimistic framing, although there are a few cautionary notes is, what we bring, we get back. So it's a bit sort of garbage in, garbage out. And ultimately, the responsibility for that partnership, I guess, rests with the human user. But let's not all be sort of Pollyanna-ish about this. Eunice, you talked about the impact on assessment being very real, and I think evidenced by the questions from our audience, and what we're hearing generally when we raise, I think, any of us AI in the context of education, is this concern about the validity of assessments. How is this working? So talk to us about how student assessment is changing at U of T in this era. And also, is there opportunity for new competencies to be assessed that weren't emphasized before the widespread introduction of AI?
Thank you, Claire. So let's think about assessment first. Oftentimes, assessment is very instrumental. We have a very clear goal. Out of assessment, what are we trying to achieve, right? So Lorna Earle, our OEZ, former professor, she talks about assessment in terms of 3 different roles, right? Assessment of learning as evidence of summative, learning evidence, and assessment for learning. More, formative assessment to really provide actionable feedback, and assessment as learning, which is really to support students have agency, right? So we need to really think about different sort of roles that assessment can play in our education settings. Now, when we think about higher education, we heavily tended to focus on the first, assessment of learning, right? High stakes, end of term assessment. And that has been long-standing issue. Now, AI is really forcing us to think about it, right? Reconsider the goal of assessment. So here's attention. AI is incredibly powerful for formative learning and assessment, right? It provides personalized feedback. We don't have to worry about that time gap. I assess a student's essays today, and it takes a month to provide feedback if I want to provide a detailed feedback. U of T develop Cognity. Everyone, please check it out. It is available through Center for Teaching, Support, and Innovation, and which is a Gen AI-based learning tool that enables instructors to create course-specific virtual tutors tailored to specific students' needs, right? Which is really, really fantastic. However, if the final assessment doesn't change, right? It stays the same, multiple choice based. Now people are so afraid of Gen AI used by students, so everybody has to come to classroom without computer, right? All the richness that students have gone through utilizing Gen AI tools and X, Y, and Z gets lost, right? So the real shift has to happen. The shift has to happen from product to process, right? So we can't just rely on the final product as a proof of learning. We have to really get into the process. We have to think about maybe, how, if you think about how in human history, how assessment started in the very first place, it was all based on oral performance, right? Of course, it would create another wiki problem, right? So how do we assess that oral performance? But, we need to really, rethink about, what is it that we try to assess and how we assess, right? How to leverage AI you can't really take AI out and try to isolate learning evidence without it, because it's just not possible. Think about the second question, the competencies, and that's the question about what is our educational goal, right? What kind of skills do our students need when they leave us, right? The critical thinking skills, 21st century skills that we've been talking about, the creativity, collaboration, communication. I do have so many brilliant undergrad students working in my lab, and they come with so strong technical skills these days, right? But the softer skills that we've been talking about, those are not soft anymore. I think they are the hard skills that students have to really work hard to develop. Technical skills, come easy these days, right? Now, the most recent OECD study on creativity, it's based on 15-year-old kids around the world, shows it is not what they learn in classroom that leads to actually creativity development. It is what they do outside of classrooms leading to students creativity development. So we really need to look into that and see how to create our learning environment at U of T, for example, in classroom, outside, as well, helping students to really develop such skills, no longer softer skills, but the skills that really matter when they leave us and enter in, workplaces that are already AI entrenched.
Yeah, the skills that are differentiating, really for humans, and Chris touched on that in his introduction. And I think coming post COVID, we've seen that there have been some challenges with the development of these skills as well. So certainly interesting view of assessment and how it needs to change. I don't know whether I'm actually kind of nostalgic. It's easy now for the all-nighters that I'm sure all of us pulled at some point in advance of that big final exam. Let's come to an important part of the discussion around AI in higher education, and that's focused on responsible and ethical AI. There's, a lot of discussions within the university and more broadly around this question. But this topic can, mean different things in different contexts and to different people. I want to come to each of you. And maybe I'll start with you, Paolo, first, and then I'll go to Eunice, and then I'll come to Susan. How is U of T ensuring the use and application of AI in higher education is responsible and ethical? And if you can, maybe give us an example, something that helps us ground our perspective, or the perspective that you're sharing on this important topic, because we could spend a whole panel just on this and then some. So Paolo.
Yeah, absolutely. Adopting AI is not a technological enterprise. It's most of all an ethical commitment, because any technology embeds human values. So essentially, we channel human values through the use of technology. And so in the very moment AI enters the classroom, we are essentially projecting the values that we believe are important for our students through this technology. So again, it's just a medium, and we put the message in. And the message is, again, the values we want to channel. In U of T, we cultivate the values of openness, accessibility, transparency, even the idea of accountability. So we are responsible, right, for what we do. And so, practically speaking, even the initiatives, including the AI Kitchen and many experimentations that faculty members have been doing over the past 3 years, essentially are along the lines of experimenting while fostering an AI pedagogy. And so the principles of AI pedagogy, I mentioned already, again, this idea of transparency, openness, the diversity of perspectives. Researchers at U of T are not just relying on the generalistic large language models that speak a language that is standardized, homogenized. So researchers are really finding the uniqueness of different perspectives that must be rendered in the way we use AI. And so it means practically to not just rely on those generalistic models, but to narrow down to specific perspectives in order to diversify that pedagogical approach. And so essentially, we are using AI to foster critical thinking. AI is artificial intelligence, and one definition for intelligence is to solve problems. Intelligence is the ability to solve a problem, but the critical thinking is the ability to know which problem to solve.
Right. Well, very well put. Eunice, talk to us about responsible and ethical use of AI.
Well, it's such a critical issue right now. As a supervisor, whenever I, supervise students' research and myself, my own research as well, what tools students should use for their data collection and data analysis, right? So just think about our undergrad students or graduate students on a daily basis. We all use Quarkus at U of T, right? And we use lots of licensed tools, stats tools, learning platforms, right? And now Gen AI is embedded across many of these tools, right? So this creates two risks. I'm thinking about two different issues. One is input, right? So AI system really create a hidden biases into learning platforms and tools, right? We are all aware, right? We're very critically aware of it, right? So when the tutoring systems included, AI tools kind of nudge students toward a certain answer or certain learning style, right? Learning pathway, it reproduces the patterns that works for certain group of people, not for everybody, right? The output side, the student work. If somebody accidentally puts interview data onto the system, right? All the data that are coming from us now flow into the external API systems, right? That we cannot control, right? So then we are leaking our, privacy and confidential potentially data. So we saw these in workplaces, right? So like Samsung restricted now ChatGPT now because their, workers actually accidentally copy and paste the, private information, right? So we are not immune with such, potential challenges. So I think that's why it is extremely important for us to be really critically engaging, educating our students, right? And thinking about, because oftentimes the students blindly believe whatever that they get out of these, Gen AI tools is true. Like, no, absolutely not, right? So, and at the same time, the equity wise, really, we have to really think about one is really the whole system is becoming extremely opaque. We call it black box, right? How to make it more transparent. I know, I understand. It just, there's a big debate about it, actually, whether that's even possible or necessary, right? But also, I think that there's too much emphasis on efficiency, right? But as you know, efficiency and speed, trying to get everything just quicker and faster and more efficient isn't necessarily the goal that we try to achieve in education, right? And how about math effects? The richer gets rich, right? So if actually AI propels the math effects even more seriously, right? So then I think we're really concerned, So how to really bring humans back into the center
of this question and make it human centered.
Yeah.
Very much so. We've had a number of questions that have highlighted the fact that AI can hallucinate and produce clearly wrong answers, and there's been some celebrated cases that have hit the newspapers of lawyers citing non-existent cases, etc. And so it's a very real issue. Again, Susan, from your perspective, having a pan-institution perspective on this, talk to us about responsible and ethical use of AI.
Yeah, I mean, just to that point before I get into that is, any assistive technology can become debilitating if it's used, overused, over-relied on, used the wrong way. Yeah, so from the university perspective, we are so lucky to be in an institution that has such a diverse set of expertise and really world-renowned expertise. And so when I was starting in on this, the ability to call up the director of the Schwartz Reisman Institute and say, I need to talk to you about this technology and understand what the implications are for an institution like ours, and know that the person on the other end of the phone is going to be just incredibly knowledgeable. And so we have drawn on AI safety experts here who are working with government. Whole governments, right? We have a number of U of T folks who are sitting on the AI task force for the federal government. People like David Naylor, for example, who sits on that. We have folks at the Munk School who have written a fantastic report on sovereign by design, talking about how we think about sovereignty, data sovereignty, compute sovereignty in Canada as a middle power. And so drawing on all of that expertise has really helped us as an institution frame the strategy that we're taking, the steps that we're taking in this area. We have an AI adoption table at the University of Toronto now. That was one of the outcomes of that task force report. And sitting around that table is a very wide variety of both faculty and senior staff. So we have folks there from the library. Turns out the librarians at U of T are like a standard deviation more literate in this area and think very deeply about things like data structures and sovereignty of data and what responsible use of that information is. We're also working with, for example, the School of the Environment to get us some better understanding, of the environmental impact, because the publications are all over the map on environmental impact. And it depends so much on where you put that data center, or where you put the compute, where you put the, but also what kind of engineering goes into that. Is it a closed loop system? Is it an open loop system? Is it using gray water? Is it using, so getting our understanding of that as an institution that's committed to Project LEAP and our carbon footprint in particular, we want to be working with the expertise we have right here at the School of the Environment to understand that that context for our university, right, and take that into account. So I think sort of all the way along the line, and through the AI adoption table, but also through these networks of experts that we have at the university who are looking at literature, who are working with governments around the world all the time and feeding that back in. That's been just both an incredible privilege for me, but also just enormously helpful for us as an institution as we try to approach this in as responsible a pathway as possible.
Sure. Paolo, I want to come to you with a follow-up question. Susan has highlighted the way in which U of T is contributing to addressing this question of responsible and ethical use of AI sort of outside the university. You're coming to us from Europe. In fact, right now you're on a speaking tour. You've got your book. Can you give us a perspective on what is a role for University of Toronto in ensuring that other organizations, external parties, governments or other external parties are developing and using AI responsibly and ethically? Would love your perspective on that.
Absolutely. So research and the institutional role of the university has a great potential for exercising soft power in this topic. Soft power means educating and raising awareness on a few important measures that we need to think about in terms of regulations, in terms of developing public AI, in terms of fostering Canadian infrastructures, Canadian data and skills in order to really leverage the power of the research universities all across Canada. Again, not just to develop a public AI as a public good for our students, for society, but also in this moment to raise awareness on the very potential of this technology as a public good. And so universities and U of T has a potential to again raise the bar of the expectations in terms of what we can do as universities, not just for our students, but for society. And it's a civic commitment. It's a stepping out of the university and into the civic society to really leverage the power of research in the field. In Toronto, in Canada, we've been pioneering the very research on machine learning and AI. So now it takes to apply the research that really makes this soft power exercise in all universities across Canada and researchers to mobilize and to mobilize our research skills in order to, again, even develop this kind of immune system to technological change. So we are still capable, there is still time to avoid that private companies take over. And in collaboration with private companies, we can really, again, build a different approach to AI. That means conceiving artificial intelligence a fundamental right for access to knowledge, because we've been dealing with a lot with digital divides for a few decades. Now the risk is an AI divide. Universities can play a role to address the potential risk of an AI divide.
Right. So, I mean, I think what you're really saying is sort of continuing a tradition where, publicly accessible research universities like the University of Toronto are having an impact, certainly outside the many corners of our three campuses, whether it's, economic development, whether it's innovation. Again, not surprising here as society is adapting to AI. That U of T would be in a position to convene people, to generate research, and to continue us on that path of ethical, responsible use. I want to come back to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I add on to this topic? Because coming from OEZ, and we are directly engaging K-12 education and also post-secondary education, and this is really close to our heart, and we have
absolutely
lots of initiatives happening at OEZ under sort of dean's office sort of leadership, and we formed the Committee for AI in Education. And our sort of focus is on really how to really bring EDI principled AI application in education, right? So, many of us really do research on actually how to leverage AI to really close the equity gaps, right? And at the same time, I think clearly there's a lack of guidelines, on the AI competency for our educators as well as AI literacy for our students, right? So a lot of work has to happen, but OEZ definitely is taking those as our core responsibilities to really bring about changes.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. There's an important piece, and I want to stick with sort of come back to education and K to 12 in particular. We've had some news this week from Ontario. People will have seen the headlines highlighting that absenteeism in high schools is a serious issue. It was during COVID, and it appears not to have been remedied. The stats are something like only 40% of high school students with an attendance record of 90% or better, and that in fact falls to a third of the class for grade 12s achieving that 90% benchmark. So we can surmise from this that while the experience isn't universal, nonetheless, there, I think, is a view, and there's some basis for that the preparedness of high school students for post-secondary education is perhaps less than it was. And I want to come back to you, Eunice, and I want to come to you, Susan, on this question of speaking specifically about the freshman class, first-year undergrads. What are the risks and what are the opportunities for the use of AI vis-a-vis first-year undergrads in this context of perhaps less preparedness than we would like for the post-secondary experience? Eunice, I'll stick with you, and then Susan, I want to come to you on this question. I am mindful of time. We've got about 15 minutes on the clock, and we've got a few questions ahead of us. But I'll get Eunice to jump in here on this one.
So two things. One is just directly address the absenteeism. I think this is just for those audience, who haven't had a chance to hear about the news, right? So this is the most recent release from Ontario Ministry of Education, which is greatly concerned about the rising. Actually, the absenteeism was there even before the COVID, right? And during COVID, the school closure, absenteeism absolutely increased. And then after COVID, actually, it doesn't go back to the normal, right? So it kind of stays along, right? So what is the issue? But you know what? Listen, this is not a high school problem. We do have the same problem at university as well, right? So at graduate program as well as undergraduate. So what this issue really, so right now the solution is really trying to consider attendance as part of course marks or a grade, right? Will that solve the problem? Maybe, right? But it will be a band-aid solution. The critical issue here is whether or not students really see the value of coming to class to be engaged in that learning, space, right? So if that focus of learning happening in classroom is still just based on one directional lecture, because they get it, right? They can get it somewhere else, right? So I think we really need to think about how we want to spend our classroom time engaging our students, what we try to achieve out of that time, right? So it is a really much broader, deeper question for everybody, right? And then
yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think some, as someone who's been a parent of high school age children a little while ago, would say that maybe, kids in high school are not best positioned to assess what the impact of choosing to skip school is.
Yeah.
And, maybe that changes as young adults mature and end up in post-secondary education. But I'm interested in this question, and maybe I'll come to you, Susan, on it. And if we have time, I'll come back to you, Eunice, on this. Is just, again, from if we take it as a given that there are significant numbers of high school students, let's say in Ontario, who appear to have suffered or experienced absenteeism at a significant level, and the attendance has not gone back to pre-COVID levels. Eunice is right; it wasn't perfect before, but it was better than it is now. Is there a temptation around AI for maybe students that are feeling less well prepared to kind of adopt that lazy posture that Paolo spoke about? We put laziness in, we get laziness out. Or is there an upside here, which is a remediation potential for AI in terms of, ensuring that cohort of incoming first years is really, ready, willing, and able to get everything out of their undergraduate education that we hope for them, and certainly I expect their parents do as well. Susan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's both and, right? It's both and. Like, and I would actually point to, I think we normally think of education in terms of content uptake. Like, how much content has been delivered to you, and how much have you uptaked like a sponge, right? And as Eunice knows, and I'm sure Paolo does that too, that's not how we think of education anymore. The guy who actually invented Cogniti, which is that AI tutor system that we're adopting from the University of Sydney, Danny Liu, says, university is about stuff, skills, and soul. And we tend to emphasize the stuff, the content, but the skills and the soul, the identity development, the interpersonal skills, all of that is critically important as well. And the thing that worries me most about the absenteeism is that during COVID, we saw a real drop in interpersonal skills and social skills. And I worry that absenteeism is going to actually have that negative effect on the skills and the social capabilities of incoming students. And so to Eunice's point about redesigning classrooms, to have content, of course, yes, content, but content in in service to the skills and the experience that the students are developing, ideally in conversation with each other, in conversation with other human beings. Again and again, we see humans get really excited about technologies that divide us. We got really excited about automotive technology, and now lots of people drive around by themselves in their car. We get really excited about social media, and social media has had some really powerful and positive effects, but it's also, cut up communities. And so I think we want to be thinking about how do we keep not just human-centered education at the university, but human community-centered education centered at the university, and how do we, for students who may have been doing a fair amount of learning either online or really at a distance with perhaps an AI partner that's always really nice to them and is always very understanding and infinitely patient. That's not how real humans are. And so some of the new tutoring systems that are coming out, there's actually a growing body of literature that says that your standard general ChatGPT, Claude, LLM is not a very good tutor. In fact, it leads, at least the early evidence is that it leads to cognitive decline. But that we are beginning to see the emergence of designed AI tutor systems that don't just give the right answer, who do make it a little bit, where they add friction back into learning. And it turns out friction is a critical element of learning. In fact, a group of our psychologists wrote a great little article in Nature on Nature Communications on bringing friction back into learning, into social situations, into other things, and what, for example, the role of a little bit of loneliness plays in helping us form and keep human relationships. We don't want a lot of loneliness, but a little bit of struggle, a little bit of loneliness is actually something that keeps us connected. So we're thinking really hard about how do we bring friction appropriately in, while and at the same time having the appropriate supports for students who need those, and making sure that those supports are available when the student needs them, but not until the student needs, like until the student really kind of is there and then needs the support.
Because it's there to,
they're going to talk to somebody else in their class first.
Yeah, not to be a hammock or I think that we probably all had that experience of, you know, something that is very worthwhile took effort and wasn't easy, and that's, you know, I think that's been true from time immemorial, and it remains true even in the age of AI. So we're going to get down to our last few questions here. I want to talk about the pace of change in AI tools, and how U of T is responding to that challenge. The tools themselves are changing so rapidly. So how is it that educators at U of T are approaching this question when it's almost like the landscape is changing so quickly? How do we keep up? How does the university keep up in training students how to use these tools? Maybe I'll go to you, Paolo, on this one, and then Eunice, you might like to comment on this.
Absolutely. Well, we are investing on competencies in terms of the current tools, today's tools. But today's tools will become one day yesterday's skills. So we invest in kind of practical technical knowledge that will get obsolete in a few days, in a few years. Or what now seems such a relevant technical skill, essentially in a few years will become the standard. And so we are investing on AI literacy. But AI is not a subject, it's a medium. This is very important. And more than just AI literacy, so to get literated on, again, proficiency, but maybe even critical thinking about AI, even more important than this is the epistemic literacy. So on how to think better with AI, how to learn with AI, and how to create with AI. And so again, to not get stuck into the technicalities of the tools that will, and some skills that will get obsolete, but skills that will be valuable for the years to come. And I'm thinking about, speaking of learning, so the very idea of learnability. So the ability to learn how to learn is becoming more important than just learning how to use AI. Learning how to learn, sometimes it means relearning, unlearning, so a process of learnability, as I call it, that would be a methodological value for the years to come. Not just content, as my colleagues said, but context is more important than content. And has been said that the process is more important than the product. And even the very idea of validation that is becoming more important than production. And so if we invest on this kind of skills beyond AI literacy, epistemic literacy will make the difference. To learn how to think better, to learn how to learn better, and how to create better. This is the most, I think, valuable skill set that we can really provide to our students to face this AI revolution.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that answer. So I'm going to go to you, but I'm going to ask you to be quick here because we're going to go right thereafter to our speed round. We're coming up to the top of the hour, which means, alas, we have to depart. We could continue this conversation all afternoon. So quickly over to you, Eunice, on pace of change.
Sure. Yeah. I just want to remind all of us actually of the fact that actually University of Toronto is one of the richest university in terms of students' multicultural, multilingual backgrounds, right? Our students are coming from all over the places around the world, right? So when we think about actually first year students, Claire, your question about, and who are they? And actually they are coming from all different countries. They're first generation immigrant students and, our, indigenous groups. And actually, so when we think about our students and, what they're doing with AI and, when we think about and talk about AI also carries cultural assumptions and norms, right? And these people have very different prior experiences with AI and technologies in general, right? That's the starting point, right? So we have to be very critical about and careful about actually, instead of making assumption that everybody has the same ideas around and experience with AI, right? So that's the starting point. So for example, in my work, actually, we're really trying to bring Gen AI and AI work into the tools by developing tools to really support those first year and incoming students, as part of onboarding. Okay.
Right. And you're speaking again to the breadth of the experience at U of T. I'm going to have to go to the speed round now. And so just really a one-liner, 30 seconds. I'm going to start with Susan, then I'm going to go to Paolo and to Eunice. What is a takeaway that you want to leave our audience with from what's been a really rich discussion? Susan.
Yeah, I think I'll take the first line from our task force report. The University of Toronto is an institution dedicated to the development of human potential. That's what a university is. That's what we remain. And what human potential is capable of doing is an interesting question right now.
Great. Paolo?
Well, AI, good news, AI is killing mediocrity. It's killing what I call the it's okayness. It's killing with the standard. Even if the standard is high, AI is killing this all. And this is a good news. So that doesn't mean to replace human beings. It means to elevate humanity's potential. AI is raising the bar. And we have an opportunity to do our best to clear the bar higher.
To go with it. Eunice, takeaway.
Yeah. AI in education can take three different directions. One is substitution. I think there is a great deal of fear about whether or not AI will replace humans, right? Not the case. Second is augmentation. Will AI actually, improve our current practice? I think it is happening. Three, that's what I want to go for, transformation. How to redesign and reconceptualize what are we trying to achieve and what it means to know, right? And how to assess our student learning in a more transformative way.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for some great takeaways, a really rich discussion. I think that, some messages have really resonated without here, which is that AI, is having an impact. There's certainly downsides, but overall, I think a hopeful message. And I think one of the key things is that this ability to, learn how to relate, that's a key human skill that is not going to be superseded by AI. So back to the part about it might give us a lot of stuff in the sense of output, but the skills and the soul remain really important and at the heart of the post-secondary experience at U of T and at other universities. So I want to say thank you to all of you, our panelists, for just a great conversation. Thank you to the team behind the scenes that produces Disruptors and Dilemmas. And thank you to you, our audience, for our engagement. We had some great questions and it really elevated our discussion today. Please come back to Disruptors and Dilemmas and spread the word in the meantime. Do please complete our survey, which is available in the chat, and watch for our follow-up email with the survey, and a recording of this will also be available in case you missed any parts or want to share it with friends who weren't able to join us. And with that, I'll say till next time, stay tuned for more excellent programming and events from U of T, and stay connected to us. Thank you.